Hey friends, I'm Christy and you're listening to Rock the Damn Boat. If you've ever bitten your tongue to keep the peace or said yes when every part of you wanted to say no, this podcast is for you. We're diving into the messy, real conversations that people pleasers like me spent decades avoiding. It's time to have the hard conversations, shake things up, and learn to stand tall even when it makes waves. So let's dive right in. I am back with a Sunday shorty. I missed last week. Admittedly, I was trying to get back on a roll and I was in Nevada City, California for my second visit this summer. I have to tell you, I have fallen in love with that charming little town. And if you've ever been in California or Arizona and visited some of the little mining towns, then you know what a treat they can be. The historic architecture and just the spirit of the Old West. Now, you can pick it apart like any other movement in history. We sent a bunch of people out west to claim land. A lot of people went up into the hills to pan for gold, and I'm sure that became a very cutthroat business. But there's just this sense of adventure and free-spiritedness that I think really bucked the trend of what was happening in very pious New England. I am going way off on a tangent now, but there's a lot of complexity to the different cultural and regional differences in the country, and getting out to explore, and especially as a solo traveler, you may get to learn all these things that you're not exposed to because of where you live. So I just encourage that whether it is a free spirit visiting a more conservative area or vice versa, that you definitely get out and expose yourself to other parts of the country. And I would say even the world, and absolutely global travel can be exciting and teach you about cultures. I have a friend, Tracy, who is just my role model for that. But even within the country itself, even parts of Texas where I live, there are definitely more conservative areas. There's this whole idea of keep Austin weird. So, Austin's always been a more progressive city, but it's also where the state capital is located. It's interesting that it's such a political epicenter and also quite a hippie lineage. That is sort of my takeaway from my travels recently. I was in Vegas for a trade show, and then I went back to Nevada City, and Nevada City is this little pocket of, I was telling a friend, it's like a hippie commune disguised as a town. It's just really progressive. A lot of people are just very free to be who they want to be. It's free-spirited, very LGBTQ plus friendly, and these communal cafes foster the idea that you can just sit down with a stranger at a table and either strike up a conversation or do your own work, but share that space. So those are all the reasons that I love Nevada City. I think it just creates this melting pot of culture, and we don't always get that where we're at. I am in a very big transitional phase of life. I have been very forthcoming about how menopause and post-menopause hormonal and brain chemistry changes have hit me pretty hard. I started a new job in June, which I'm really enjoying, and that was a big shift after taking time off to work to build something of my own. Didn't quite work out the way I wanted it to, but it led me into this great opportunity. And I have so many good friends in the industry that I saw last week. As part of this transition, I am changing up the ending to my book, The Shipyard Sisters. And I had the pleasure of visiting the Rosie the Riveter Museum and exhibit in Richmond, California. If you ever have the chance to go do that and World War II is interesting to you, and especially the role of women in World War II as workers on the West Coast, but all over the country, as I learned. It is a really well done exhibit. It's small, so it doesn't take long to go through. There's other parts of that complex that you can go visit, an old Ford assembly plant that was converted to create Jeeps, I think is what they were doing, along with some other things. It is also a national park. There was a park ranger who was there in the building who gave a lot of great information about the history of that particular factory. It was built by Henry Kaiser. So it was Kaiser Shipyards there in Richmond, California. And he went on to start Kaiser Permanente. He was one of the first to offer health care for his workers and an in-house nurses station that could treat minor injuries. So very centered on options and what he provided to his workers. Now, just like we know about history, most of the women were not extended the ability to work once the men came back. So there was still a lot of positive movement that needed to happen, that still needs to happen today as it relates to pay gaps and things like that. But this exhibit really honored the role of women in the workplace during World War II. My novel centers around 4 women who worked in the shipyards, and one of the characters is based on my grandmother, who did that as part of her time in California when my grandfather was stationed there in the Coast Guard. I think that's part of why I love California so much, is because not only do I feel that sense of free spirit when I'm there, but I also have lineage, generations going back that spent time in California and specifically in the Bay Area. I don't know a lot about that time for my grandmother, and I'm not sure that any of my family really does. I don't think anyone really asked her. I do have letters from my grandfather to her during his time there in the Coast Guard, and so we can get a little glimpse into their life, and I've been told a few stories by my mother, but I don't really have a lot of information. Learning about the different roles that women played and how some of the things that I wrote into my novel were inspired just intuitively. There is a character in my book who is a lesbian, and there was a whole display about this being a huge cultural shift for the LGBTQ community. In San Francisco, in the Bay Area, there was the opportunity for people to meet and feel less alone, not only in nightclubs or different social scenes that welcomed LGBTQ, but also the fact that they could come and work. I felt so affirmed in a way by writing about this character. I knew it was important to have her in the story, but I did not realize that it was such a pivotal time for her character being able to not necessarily come out, but to feel less alone in that region. She had been raised in a small town, and she finally felt like she belonged somewhere. And same with my other characters as it related to family life. One of the characters is taking care of 2 boys at home, and her mother is helping. But one of the exhibits was all about how difficult childcare was during that time, and how there were schools that were created specifically for children of shipyard workers. So there was this whole infrastructure that was built from this need for women to go and help build ships and build airplanes and build heavy equipment for war efforts. One of the most profound discoveries for me, and I did not really write this into my book, one of my sort of fringe characters is dealing with a life of poverty. But one of the exhibits talked about how difficult it was to find housing. Now, I knew that was an issue based on something my grandfather had written about trying to find an apartment, or one of the officers telling him that it might be difficult. I did write a nod to that hardship, but they talk about how many people were living in makeshift homes and people's barns and sleeping outside, and how difficult it was to find housing. It did create the need for both government housing, and then also some of these shipyards built housing. So there was a map of all the different complexes that Kaiser built to help support his employees. And it was interesting because there were a couple of those you could still go visit today. But imagine the progression, and war is terrible. And I'm not suggesting that World War II helped in any way. Now, it absolutely helped squash a reign of terror from Hitler and the Nazis. It also was the catalyst for new things to happen in America, which were these housing developments, which was women getting to work, maybe for the first time. It was one of the first times that women truly entered the workforce. And like I mentioned, there was a huge setback when men came back, but we had all gotten a taste of that, right? And then there was the need for formalized daycare and the communion of LGBTQ people who had felt alone in their small cities. There was some element of other minority workers, but it sounded like from the exhibits that it didn't propel things in the same way. And especially when you think about how Japanese people were treated at that time because of Pearl Harbor. There were hardships for other minorities. Blacks were still segregated in many factories, and Japanese were being shipped to camps. It was like one step forward, one step back. It was a fascinating time, and I am not a huge history buff. I don't really choose documentaries, but learning about my grandmother's time working, going to visit the Rosie the Riveter exhibit in Richmond, California, and just starting to refresh and work on the edits of my book, it finally kind of got me jazzed about writing the book again. Writing a book is hard work. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And anyone that tells you otherwise probably either used AI to write their book, or maybe just dedicated day in, day out time to writing that book. It is a difficult journey, and almost everyone I have ever talked to agrees with that sentiment. It is worth it. So if you have a book on your heart and you want to write it and bring it to this world, please do. One of the things I was thinking about as it relates to writing is imposter syndrome. And my husband and I watched the remake of the Firestarter movie last night. Firestarter was written in 1984 by Stephen King. It talks about Lot 6, this drug that was given to college co-eds to help tap into telepathic and psychic powers. And then their daughter, two of them, their daughter Charlie, actually has those abilities when she's born. If you've watched The Boys on Amazon, if you've watched Stranger Things, probably the list goes on, that all spawned from this idea in Firestarter. And who knows, Stephen King may have been inspired by something written years or decades before he wrote Firestarter. There is nothing in this world that hasn't been written in some way, shape, or form. So whatever story you have to bring to life, it is your story. It is your point of view. I'm excited to bring Shipyard Sisters to life because most of the World War II era female fiction takes place in Europe, where all of the fighting was happening. So there's not a lot of fiction that takes place at home in America, if you're American like me. I thought I was going to publish it by September 25th, my grandmother's birthday. Not going to happen. Maybe 9/25/27, but I'm thinking spring. So I could use a little encouragement if you want to send it my way. And that is today's Sunday Shorty. lean into your gifts. Honor those who helped out in World War II. If you have a grandmother who did that, get her story. Oh my goodness, we are starting to lose those women and we need their stories now more than ever. The National Park there in Richmond said that they will document stories. So if you have that, they will add it to their archives, and that way they have everything in a story for future generations. So I encourage you to share any memorabilia or stories that you have with them, and to solo travel when you can, because it's amazing. Experience a different culture, a different region, a different way of thinking. That's it for me. I will talk to you again soon. You've been listening to Rock the Damn Boat, a podcast produced and recorded by Christy Hughes. You can follow, subscribe on both Apple and Spotify, and your 5-star review goes a long way. Thank you so much for your support of the show.